What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy, and wanted to cover something that, has come to my attention, might be something worth discussing, given the combination of the name of my channel and some of the videos that I put on my channel, namely some of the video games that I play. Because some people might not think that, Christian and gamer even gel together. Never mind Christian playing M-rated games in some cases. So, this is probably going to be a two-parter because I want to try and keep each part sort of succinct and, just focused on a particular aspect of this. Because I think there's one thing that we need to establish before the other. And so what I'm going to focus on this time around is, should Christians even be playing video games? And really, I think a lot of that boils down to your perception of, media in general. I think pretty much everybody would agree Christians are totally fine to, engage in reading books, even generally speaking, watching TV or movies. Now, depending on the rating of the TV show or movie, that makes it a little more debatable. But I think for the most part, Christians would say that, oh yeah, watching some TV here and there is fine, or, reading some books is fine. Because there's kind of the assumption that, that's something you do in your downtime. You don't necessarily get so invested in those that that like it detracts from other things that you're supposed to do. Now it gets a little touchy with, watching shows and stuff, especially with the advent of, binge watching on Netflix or Hulu or whatever streaming service. So even that line's a little blurrier, but because it's something that is, passive as well, more people seem to be okay with the concept of watching TV and or reading books. When I say passive regarding reading books, the scenes that are involved in it, it's more so your imagination conjuring up whatever image comes to your mind through the words that are on the page. But where some people differentiate video games in that regard is because they're more active, you're involved in pressing the buttons to do the things that happen within the video game. And, yeah, I understand they're a little bit different in that way. And I also understand that it's a bit more common for some people to, kind of get borderline obsessed with video games and such. Some of them even have gambling aspects to them, essentially, and gambling addiction is a known thing. So, but that can't really happen with TV shows and books and whatnot. So the gambling aspect of it, I'll admit, is a little bit different. But on the whole, I don't believe that, if we're going to paint a broad brush of should Christians play video games, I really don't think video games should be that far removed in our thought process from other forms of media. Books, TV, movies, even music maybe. And the reason I say this, a couple of reasons I say this, but the primary one comes down to the fact that ultimately, in some way or another, it's all fiction to some extent. Like, even reading an autobiography, what you're reading is, real life stuff that happened to a real life person, but the image of the person or the perspective that you get on that person isn't necessarily every single thing about that person that was ever real. So you're not necessarily getting the whole truth of it. Thus, in a way, it's still somewhat fictional. And with, shows and movies, it's generally even more so. Movies, you get a lot of, based on a true story, but there are a lot of creative liberties taken. Even with documentaries, sure, there's real stuff being recorded, but, do you really get everything? You're not truly experiencing these things. You're not living these things out. And I guess that's what I really mean when I say they're all in some way works of fiction. The point of that is to say that you are not, even in video games, although you're pressing the buttons to make the things happen, you are not the video game avatar that is performing the actions being displayed. So, even if it's a violent video game, you are not the one going around and, shooting people. Or, you're not, let's say you're playing God of War or Darksiders or something like that. You're not the one actively going around and, chopping people to bits with your scythes or whatever weapon you happen to be using. Heck, in terms of gameplay mechanics, even something a little more lighthearted and family friendly like Kingdom Hearts, there's still the same gameplay aspect. It's just there's not as much realism to it. There's not as much blood and gore to it especially than God of War. So again, all that to say that I don't know if we should really differentiate video games that much from other forms of media. So with that in mind, on the concept of, or regarding the question of should Christians play video games, I would say that, as a general statement, that yes, it's okay. Now, in sort of part 2 of this, which I'm going to get into in another video, I might say it's, kind of a matter of personal preference and ability and tolerance regarding which games might be okay. But on the whole, I would say, yeah, sure, video games are fine. You can even find video games that aren't violent. Take something like a Candy Crush or a Farmville or, even various simulator games. They're not violent in any way. So if violence is your reason for saying video games are bad, there are video games that are non-violent. If, getting, some sort of addicted to it is your, reasoning for that, or if, the whole getting addicted to it thing, really, if you're going to have any reason for not playing video games, that's probably the strongest candidate. But in a way, there's also, sort of the idea or that temptation once you start sitting around and just watching TV, for example, or even reading a book. There are people who get very much wrapped up in the world of a book that they're reading and just keep going and going and going, forsaking other things that maybe they should be doing in the moment. because they're so interested in the book and they want to know what happens. Similar kind of thing with TV shows sometimes, and you get interested in a show, you binge watch it all the way through until you're done with it, and maybe you move on to the next thing. So maybe there isn't quite as much potential with books or movies or something like that, but there is still sort of that possibility of getting hooked on something and it, maybe affecting what you end up doing because you're so interested in that. And that's really the whole reason anybody brings up, video game addiction. Well, the whole reason most people bring up video game addiction in this discussion, most of the time they're not even really talking about addiction all that much. They're, the way they're defining addiction in this context is that they're saying that, people play video games to the detriment of other activities that could and or should be done. Now, there is one little, there's one slight issue with my argument that video games are generally okay to engage in. And, really, though, this argument is very similar to the argument you might hear from a vegan regarding, eating animal products. Because, while vegans don't eat animal products or often, at least, because of how the animals are treated and those kinds of things, one could argue maybe video games should be avoided because of the way that the development team gets treated. It is currently fairly common practice to have, these big crunch time development cycles where the people working on a certain video game are putting in like 100 or so hours a week to get this thing, released on schedule. And that's not a healthy practice. Ask like 90% of the internet's, denizens, and they'll say that no, that's not a healthy thing. Now, some people will actually, once they're aware of this, they might actually avoid a certain publisher's games because they know this publisher has a habit of, engaging in that crunch time cycle and just outright draining their employees without, especially if it's without added compensation for their time. But other people are like, I don't really like that they do this, but I'm still going to play this game anyway because I think the game's fun, or at least other games in the series have been fun. So, again, similar notion to veganism and why people do or don't follow that. So, when it comes to Christians specifically playing video games or not, I don't know if Christians really have any additional motivation to avoid video games than most other people do. I just, it's a form of entertainment. In some cases, darn near a form of art. You play certain games that are far more about the spectacle and or the experience of it. Take something like a Journey or whatever. And, nobody's really going to say that those games are causing harm to the player or even any sort of detriment, really. So, again, you might want to draw the line with certain types of games, and I'll get into that in the following video on this topic. But if we're going to boil it down simply to the matter of, should Christians play video games, and just leave it at that, across the board, blanket statement, I would say that it's fine. It's a form of entertainment like any other. So, unless you're going to say that absolutely no form of entertainment is okay because it's, a waste of time or something like that, then first off, you're being way too strict. And second, I mean, you're still bunching all of that together, and video games should not really be differentiated from any other form of entertainment or media because of that. So anyway, I guess that wraps up my thoughts on this part of what I'm going to say. Next video related to this is going to be more specifically about maybe where one may or may not want to draw the line when it comes to playing certain video games versus others. So, if you're interested in that, and you want to make sure you don't miss it, make sure you subscribe to my channel, click the notification bell to get updates when I post new videos. And if you like something more along these lines, where it's, sort of combining the Christian thought process into, more real life situations or topics or things like that, make sure to like the video and maybe share it if you want others to see. I do videos like this a fair amount of the time. I mean, maybe not necessarily every week, but usually a couple of them come out each month or so. But if I start seeing more engagement on these types of videos, maybe I'll think about doing them more often. Anyway, aside from that, you can look down in the description for info on other social media pages and how to follow those and engage and all that kind of stuff. And if you have thoughts on other video topics you might want me to cover, or just any other ideas or thoughts to add to the discussion, whatever you have for me, leave a comment down below. So anyway, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.